Namaste. Can you hear me, Professor Sogner? Am I audible to you for now? Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Namaste, Professor Sogner.
My pleasure being connected. Is the background fine? Is the background in the right order?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
can
Yes.
read it, yeah? Because
Yes.
I
Yes, sir.
sort of had to.
Of course, I can. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. And I was just waiting for this interview. And now, of course, now that you're here, so it's all. So I'm very happy. And before we start with the interview, I would want to tell the people of mine about the man of reputation, the man of eminence, the man of letter, and the man who is totally or who has digged deep into the ocean of meta-humanist transhumanism. Welcome, Professor Sogner. I am really happy that you have joined me in this interview. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you for
So,
inviting
so
me. It's a
before we start with
pleasure.
before we start with the interview, I would want to give a brief, a man that though need no introduction, but still I would want to give the introduction to my people. So we have with us Professor Stephen Lawrence Sogner. He is from John Cabot University, and that is in the heart of Italy, Rome. He is the director of the Beyond Humanism Network. He is the fellow of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. He is a research fellow at the EVA Institute for the Humanities of EVA Women's University. He is a visiting fellow at the Ethics Center of the Frederick Skeller University, Geneva. Thank you for joining us, sir. Thank you once again. And with your permission, I would want to move forward to the interview section, if you allow me with that.
Yes, please. It's my pleasure being here, being connected.
Thank you, sir. So, okay, so before we actually start, I have a very, very, very basic question, sir. The question is that people tend to confuse between these two key terms. The first term is post-humanism, another one is transhumanism. So how would you differentiate it? I mean, though it's a huge, post-humanism is a huge umbrella term, but when we are talking about it, people tend to confuse it that only AIs and, and transhumanistic things or technology, they are more invested in this particular regime. So what do you opine?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question, actually. So I've been trying to move this field and promote this field in academic studies. And even there, even among established scholars, there's often been some kind of misunderstanding concerning the use of these terms. And it's also due to the different uses in different parts of the world, actually. So sometimes posthumanism is being used as an umbrella term, whereby sort of critical posthumanism, philosophical posthumanism, speculative posthumanism, metahumanism, transhumanism, all can be subsumed under posthumanism. And in that case, basically posthumanism stands for a move towards non-dualistic thinking in general. On the other hand, a different use is actually which stresses, well, yes, all of these movements have to do towards, it represents a move towards non-dualistic thinking. Still, it is important to clearly separate transhumanism, critical posthumanism, metahumanism, because actually there are some transhumanists who do affirm a more dualistic way of thinking, sort of some more classical transhumanists. Euro-transhumanism, which is what I'm representing, or metahumanism in my version, is more, leans more towards also finding a sort of connection between critical posthumanism and transhumanism. It lies in between the various movements. So one has to be, I just want to make you aware, one has to be extremely careful when using all these different terms, because the uses even within the field are quite diverse. For example, in In France, for example, posthumanism is used as a radical form of transhumanism, which focuses on mind uploading, whereas transhumanism in itself sort of stands more for genetic alteration. So for the initial step concerning augmenting humans by means of emerging technologies, and posthumanism sort of represent the next further development, which has to do with humans becoming digital. So there are loads of different versions which have to do with loads of different meanings which are associated with post-trans and metahumanism. That was partly also one of the reasons why I sort of developed the field and promoting the field post-human studies. So there are many different people who have associations, who have resonances to these various notions. And in all of these movements, the term post-human is being used. That's why I sort of decided, well, to call the field post-human studies. And in 2017, together with James Hughes, together with Sang-Yu Shin from Ewha Women's University in Seoul, we established the Journal of Post-Human Studies. In corporations also with Penn State University Press. So that's the first double-blind, peer-reviewed publication online as well as in print, in which basically the various notions and meanings of the post-human are being dealt with. So in general, what we can say maybe as a general development which is being taken into consideration. So there are various cultural philosophical movements which see traditional humanism, traditional dualistic humanism, and by dualistic I mean categorical ontological dualities, basically humans consisting of a material body and an immaterial soul as a problematic feature, as something which needs to be overcome, which needs to be twisted, which needs to be revised at least, in particular because of the discriminatory implication which go along with dualistic thinking, but also because it's highly implausible, because it's very problematic to clarify, to explain how two radically different substances can interact with one another, the material and the immaterial. And thereby, these movements, or many, at least philosophers who deal with these movements, draw upon Spinoza, because Spinoza exactly saw this challenge. And that was one of the reasons why he embraced a pantheist version, a monist understanding of ontology. And another important thinker who is sort of prefiguring, so it is Spinoza who's an important thinker for leading towards thinking beyond humanism or post-human philosophies. So there is Spinoza, there is Darwin, who takes evolutionary thinking seriously, and there is Nietzsche, who also embraces this evolutionary account and has reflected upon an evolutionary dynamic understanding of the world, presenting an ontology of permanent becoming by affirming also, so going back to Heraclitus, who actually can be seen as the initial ancestor of all these ways of thinking. And then what needs to be done is to clarify where do we stand? Where does someone stand? Which notion of the post-human gets used? In general, what one can say, sort of transhumanism is rooted in the Anglo-American tradition. It has to do with overcoming the current limitations, the current personal limitations by means of technologies. Insofar, it actually has more of a normative goal. It has more of a goal in sort of mostly interested in dealing with ethical normative questions by being focused. It is in our interest to transcend our current limitations. Why should we do so? Because thereby we increase the likelihood of us living good lives. On the other hand, we've got a more continental philosophical tradition, which is related or associated with critical post-humanism. And here the central focus is more in an epistemological, ontological one, and it has to do with trying to reconceptualize who we are as non-dualistic entities. And here the foundational figures or the reference points are in particular people like Deleuze or Foucault, who in the French tradition have had similar attempts, but without so strongly being associated or focused on technological means as the post-human debates is. And then there's a great variety of meta-humanist positions. Sort of the meta-humanism I'm suggesting is actually it affirms a weak version of transhumanism and a weak version of critical post-humanism. I'm very critical of radical versions of transhumanism and critical post-humanism. And but I think actually, even though there is quite some hostility between the various approaches, between transhumanism and critical posthumanism, and that mostly has to do, I think, with the different cultural background, with the different use of language. Transhumanism is, as I said, rooted in Anglo-American thinking. It's very scientific. It is very linear. So it has a more sober use of language. It has more scientific way of expressing itself. Then on the other hand, critical posthumanism is clearly rooted in the continental European philosophical tradition. Thereby it has a more metaphorical way of expressing itself. It is a more dialectic way of thinking. And this in itself is a challenge concerning having the exchanges between critical posthumanists and transhumanists. And the critical posthumanists have a more elaborate philosophical understanding to the most part, whereas there's less of an awareness actually what's going on in the sciences. The transhumanists, on the other hand, are mostly rooted in the natural sciences, computer science, mathematics, and so on. And so they're much better, they have a much better understanding concerning what is actually going on, but they have less of a humanistic, less of a philosophical background. So there are loads of advantages, disadvantages, challenges when putting members in discussion, when trying to realize exchanges between these various groups. And all that was part of the motivation, actually, because I think there are more similarities between members of both traditions than is widely being acknowledged. I think there's important to promote the exchanges, promote discussions, and this is what I've been doing for more than 20 years. I sort of started dealing with these issues actually more than 20 years ago. And then there were various steps in order to develop these things further. There was an annual conference series, the Beyond Humanism conference series, which I launched in 2009. Then the book series I launched. And then in 2017, I started the together with some colleagues, started the Journal of Posthuman Studies. And in the meantime, for example, one of my cooperators, colleagues, friend Sang-Yu Shin from the Eva University in Seoul, he's managed to launch an MA PhD program on posthuman studies. I've started a course on posthuman studies at John Cabot University in Rome. So posthuman studies gradually is taken more and more seriously, and it is understood. The relevance and implications to deal with such issues have been understood. And so because basically what used to sound like fiction 20 years ago is now becoming more and more relevant. And it's being dealt with in series like Black Mirror, in Westworld, in Hollywood movies, or in novels. And that's why more and more people are getting interested in realizing it's not just a topic for young people who've been sitting in front of the computer too long, but it actually, it's the attempt to reflect upon the most pressing challenges of our times, and doing so in a philosophical manner, doing so in a very complex way, rooted in various philosophical traditions. And these traditions also, and this is also why I'm also referring to my own account as Eurotranshumanism. It also takes the rootedness, the locatedness of one's position into consideration. So without trying to attempt, to reduce to move away from neo-colonial tendencies, because there is a clear sort of, I understand that the rootedness of my perspective very much draws upon, well, on the one hand, I've got connections to the Anglo-American, but the continental European world. On the other hand, sort of strong reference points with Nietzsche and Heraclitus and Spinoza in the continental European tradition. So there is a clear situatedness. And so by engaging with discourses from intellectuals from various parts of the world, it is important to take that into consideration.
Wow. Thank you for this amazing bifurcation, sir. I know it will surely help clearing the dilemmas that people deal with when they talk about post-humanism, transhumanism, or metahumanism. So thank you so much for your explanation. And before we move further, I would want to pay the regards of Francesca Fernando. I had the interview with her yesterday, and she has she has asked me to convey her regards to you. So welcome on her behalf as well, right? And yes,
Thank you. Yeah.
now I would like to move further to my very first question. So UNESCO has propounded or maybe given a basic slogan that says AI for all. How do you see it? How do you see AI? How do you see artificial intelligence, or you know the intelligence that is overshadowing everything now? How do you see it?
Yeah, AI now, in particular, as a consequence of the generative AI, which has been launched or developed and publicly launched not so long ago, it's sort of everyone's talking about AI and talking about the implications of AI and that it needs to be taken seriously. And actually, the results are extremely striking. I'm currently teaching a course, or for some time I've developed a course on the ethics of AI before actually generative AI. It has been sort of in everyone in the wider cultural tradition, and so I'm just looking back on sort of what scholars published in collections in 2020, and then it was said, well, in certain respects it is extremely striking, but then when it comes to linguistic capacities, there are still loads of limitations. And now we're having these discussions with ChatGPT, and we're realizing, well, what was taken for granted in 2020 is no longer plausible in 2023 or 2024 now. And still, what we need to take into consideration, so in how far is that sort of is AI, for example, creative? Are we confronted with something which is human-like capacities, which moves into that direction? And here the question, basically the central issue which arises when it comes to generative AI, I'm not just focusing on that specific issue because that's sort of most pressing at the moment. We look back at how these generative AI is being developed. So what it draws upon by means of deep learning, it looks upon all the various, for example, when it's meant to be develop a video processing tool, when it's meant to you develop something where you put in a prompt, verbally a prompt, and then it's supposed to change the prompt into some visuals, which it can do now. Up to 1 minute, 1 minute visuals can be developed, which are always something new, which are never identical to something which has actually been filmed before. In order to realize that tool, what was needed to make the algorithm aware of videos which have already been published. And it does so both by drawing upon copyrighted videos as well as by non-copyrighted videos. It basically searches the web and makes use of all the different videos in order to develop something, to develop an algorithm which can generate some on the basis of a linguistic, of a verbal prompt, it can generate a new video. And then the question here arises, well, what does it do? Is that what an algorithm does at the moment? Is that like learning? Is that similar to an artist who goes to the Uffizi and studies the historical famous artist? Is that similar to a writer who reads Goethe and Shakespeare? And therefore, by learning, by making oneself aware with the great historical works, you realize, you get inspired, and then you develop something new? Or is it because by getting exchanged with the various, by getting confronted with, it's not just a confrontation, it's an incorporation of the various videos. It gets considered, it changes the algorithm, it gets incorporated into the newly formed algorithm, that it's an illegitimate infringement upon copyrighted material. And in that way, it would be highly problematic to do so. In any case, what gets generated then as a consequence is extremely, so that is one of the challenging questions we're currently confronted with, is when the algorithms generative AI algorithm gets developed, is that like learning, or is that an infringement on copyright? And then we've got an algorithm, we've got a prompt, and it develops something new. Here the question was, in the end, well, can that itself be copyrighted? Can an AI be an author of something? Is sort of authorship something which can be associated to an AI? And so far, this is not the case. So far, sort of whatever was generated by an AI cannot be copyrighted, because it is not a person. It is not. It doesn't have the proper authorship. In the same way, actually, there was a famous photo by a monkey some time ago. So basically, a photographer was taken, set up a certain technologies for taking pictures, went into the wilderness. The monkey took a selfie, which went viral then all over the world, and in social media, because of a very funny picture of the face of the monkey. And again, as a consequence, he could have made he could have made millions. He could have made a lot of money. But who could have made a lot of money? Who should possess the copyright concerning the picture which was taken? The copyright of the picture which gets taken needs to be the author. And that needs to be the one who basically presses the button in order to take the picture, which clearly was not the photographer. And the question arose: should it be the ape which was actually pushing the button? But because the ape is not a person, again, the copyright couldn't be held by the ape either. And consequently, it became an open access picture, and no one was able to make money out of that. And so here we see the challenges. So with authorship, it needs to be something. So it's still sort of legally the case that you need to have a human author. You need to be a person, at least, in order to have the authorship concerning a work. And this authorship is we are still further away from actually regarding an algorithm as a person. We would need different capacities, maybe more capacities we would need to, in order to recognize an algorithm as a person. Maybe a sufficiently developed capacity of suffering would have to be relevant. It would have to possess some necessary capacities which are connected to a specific moral status. And this is not the case so far. So when something now gets generated by an AI and then worked on afterwards by a human, when an artist, for example, when you use the generative AI in order to create a video, and then afterwards the human makes changes, makes selections, puts something together, then we can have a new artistic creation. And maybe in this way, sort of new artistic creations get realized. So it is interesting to see at least sort of the challenges, because it is striking to see what generative AI is already developing. But because there is not such a thing as an AI being alive, an AI being conscious, an AI being self-conscious, or an algorithm having all these capacities, it does not yet have the appropriate morally relevant capacity. So authorship as well as personhood cannot meaningfully already be attributed to something. Does that mean we can say that an AI, such a generative AI, can create a work of art? Probably not. The question is here sort of the question of with an artwork is even more complex, because then what is relevant for an artwork to being created? Is it just sort of the reception? If you get confronted, if you're reading a wonderful masterpiece like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and you feel at home, you feel understood, you're fascinated by the various thoughts which take place in that novel, and then you realize, well, that novel was actually or a future version similarly was actually created by an AI, would that mean that the AI has actually created such a great masterpiece? We don't have yet an example where this has happened, firstly. So so the creations are striking, but they are not that far developed. And firstly, actually, it does change the perception when for the recipient, knowing that something was created by an AI, then usually changes. It changes, even though you might have felt at home in it before. It changes your understanding because of the lack of consciousness, self-consciousness, inner experience, which current AIs do not possess. So that's why, you know, I think it is, in the end, I think even though the developments are extremely striking, which we can see in AI at the moment, we're still far away from algorithms who could be attributed with something like an equal status to humans. Further capacities like being alive, conscious, self-consciousness, you know, these would still have to be developed, or at least capacity of suffering would have to be meaningfully attributed to such an AI. That's why I think actually the fear, the people who talk about the fear associated to AI leading to human extinction, AI taking over the world, AI putting humans into the zoo, that's just, you know, a couple of people from Silicon Valley who present these ideas in order to get on the cover page because they know doomsday scenarios are very much in fashion. And people react strongly to these doomsday scenarios. I still think it is, well, they're very helpful tools. They enable us. We should draw upon them. We should use them. But there's actually no reason why we should so far be afraid of AI leading to such doomsday scenarios, or AI, you know, attributing something,
But
reaching
Professor
something like
Sogner,
human level
the
capacities.
thing that makes me concerned is and it's simply about the literary dilemmas, right? So scholars or researchers or the people who are studying or into education, there are so many literary dilemmas. People are using chat GPTs, and the real or the most organic version of your churning of your thoughts, it's getting vanished, it's getting evaporated. So how do you think we should control that?
We cannot control that. The advantages are too big, that we will draw upon the latest developments, and if you actually read the responses, maybe you can get a B with by means of ChatGPT, but you won't, you know. But to progress to something further, all the nuances, the fine tunings, it's still, you can actually sort of, actually the structures are such, and are such that they always remain still on a very general level. In order to make a decisive progression to some new insights, ChatGPT hasn't realized it, and that's why I think sort of, no, actually it can be extremely beneficial for humans to use it, to draw upon it, and then to develop further. I think it might, in the same way as nowadays it is just common, you know, everyone is using digital resources, digital text, in order to do digital humanities studies. You look, you program an algorithm in order to look for how often does a certain word show up in authors of a certain time period, and then you get a new insight into what is relevant for that specific time period. In the same way as that tool is extremely relevant for understanding, for analyzing literature at a certain period of time, in the same way, well, we're using in ChatGPT in order to get inspiration, maybe in order even to write an initial draft, but in order to get to the real nuances, in order to do the fine tuning, a human has to work over it, and then only the fine nuances will come out. It is not yet there that the highest level of capacities can be realized by an AI. And the most important thing for that is actually, the most important reason is, well, firstly, AIs don't have that issue of consciousness, self-consciousness, and even more important than that, it doesn't have intentionality. And I'm not saying it is impossible for an AI to develop intentionality. because intentionality in humans also came about as a consequence of evolutionary developments. When did living entities come about? Living entities came about on Earth 3.5 billion years ago. So the Earth was realized 4.5 billion years. It took 1 billion years in order for the first living entities to come about. First, we had a material world determined by cause and effect, and then suddenly we had entities with some sort of striving towards a certain goal, and then they developed further. We developed further. Humans, plants, apes, and humans came about, and now we've got something like intentionality. We by ourselves make a decision. I want to do this, and this is something, and this is something we cannot yet see in algorithms and in AI so far. That's why there's still a significant gap between, even though I can see why people are scared or why people are, but people are always scared when something new comes up. And so far, the worries of AI taking over, I don't have a strong reason for that.
Thank you for clearing my doubts, sir. I would want to move forward to my next question. It's again about transhumanism. So we have adopting, or we are adopting the transhumanist measures in our day-to-day life. So be it the Grey Goo, be it your engineered microbiota, you have human augmentations and gene editing, so you have. But to what extent we should go, and what is the last line where we should stop? I would want to know your views about that.
When the last line, as if there was, we've been developing continuously, and sort of to look into the future, we will continue to develop as long humans are. We need to develop, we need to adapt, we need to try out new things. 300,000 years ago, well, 6 million years ago, the last common ancestor of apes, great apes, and humans existed. Then the split occurred. About 300,000 years ago, a genetic mutation occurred, which enabled humans to develop something like language, to develop the language, to develop the organic prerequisites for developing language. Where will we be in 300,000 years? Where will we be in 6 million years in the future? Humans will probably no longer be around. We will either died out or we will have developed further. Now we've developed capacities in order to actively change our being in the world by means of genetic engineering, by means of brain-computer interfaces, as well as by digitalization. Where should we stop? Well, the decisive goal, why we should employ it, why we're using these technologies, is it's to increase the likelihood of personal flourishing. We want to have a higher quality of life. And we can see in the past that by drawing upon these technologies, sort of the great diversity of personal flourishing has increased. And one of the most decisive steps for doing so is basically by increasing the health span, by living longer healthily. And we've got good studies in where we can see how the life expectancy, at least the life expectancy, has significantly changed in the past 200 years. 200 years ago, sort of the average life expectancy was 40 years. Now it's 80 years. In the most developed countries, it can be up to 90 years. And that's a wonderful development, but it can go even further. So far, it seems to be the case, sort of the oldest human who's lived on Earth was 102 years old. It was a French.
China. Yeah.
No, it was a French lady who was like in 122 who managed it to 122. There's some discussion whether she actually got that old about her date of birth. But sort of, let's say about 120 years. That's sort of it seems to be that's what humans what the human organism is currently able to bear. But on the other hand, then we see, well, there are Greenland whales who can live more than 200 years. There are other organisms which can live more than 400, 500 years. And basically, even big organisms can live significantly longer than we humans can so far. So far, so the basic human constituency, the basic organism has not been altered so significantly. We've merely, within the time frame what we can bear, like the 22 years. We've shifted from a life expectancy of 40 to 80 years. And we're moving further with all these new technologies we're currently developing. But on the other hand, if we manage to, for example, integrate the gene responsible, which enables a Greenland whale to live more than 200 years into human existence, then we could also expand the life expectancy of humans significantly. We would develop further significantly. Should we do so? Should we not do so? Where are the limitations? I think the decisive step is sort of the focus is a person-centered ethics. I think what really matters is a great diversity of personal flourishing. And in contrast to some of the transhumanists in Oxford, there are quite a few who really have utopian enterprises, and they embrace a type of long-termism. They say, no, what matters is the long-term survival of humanity. And thereby one could, it might even be fine that 95% of humanity gets extinct as long as humanity survives. And I'm extremely critical of that. I think that's highly dangerous because it is a utopian enterprise, and utopian enterprise means you sacrifice the quality of lives of the persons who currently exist for some future personal existence. And that's not worth it. We don't know whether the others exist. What really matters is the quality of life of the people who already exist, who are here right now, and the personal, but also the quality of life of other living entities. But primarily, firstly, the personal qualities of life. By personal, I mean not only humans. I also mean the great apes, the dolphins, the magpies, and the others who actually fulfill the criteria for a certain moral recognition, for having self-consciousness, for example. And so I'm extremely critical of strongly utopian enterprises which stress, no, what matters is survival of humanity in the long term. And as long as we don't get extinct, and the main thing we should focus is on not getting extinct. But it doesn't matter if 95% of humanity gets destroyed. I think that's extremely cynical, and I think that's extremely dangerous because you sacrifice, you do not consider all the suffering of the current people which are alive. So I do take an as good as it gets approach. I focus on, the qualities of lives which actually currently exist in order to minimize their suffering.
So what concerns me more, you were talking about the life prolongation pursuit, right? That it was simply about the prolongation of your organic lifespan, right? But I am really concerned about a person whose organic life is reaching up to 60 years by the help of gene editing or something, or maybe augmentations. We will be prolonging his natural span. He'll be on medications or drugs or anything, but that will be playing with the organic or normal structure with that person. So don't you think it's highly unethical? We should not deal with it. I mean, how do you take it? And along with that, sir, we have a person, Neil Harbison is his name. So he has got an antenna implanted on his head. He was colorblind, and now he can see colors with the help of that antenna. Kevin Warwick is the person who did that implant, and Kevin Warwick is, again, he got a chip implanted in his hand, right? So we have techniques like CRISPR or so many other things, but they are again playing with the normal structure, with your brain, with your body. So for me, I totally think that one should be curtailed when it comes to transhumanism. So I would really want to know your view about it, sir.
So why do we take that for granted, what we currently have, the capacities we currently have? There's a status quo bias. We sort of, whatever we feel comfortable with right now, whatever the surroundings we live in at the moment, we take them, we feel happy in it, we feel comfortable in it, we know it's working. And then whenever we change something, there is a certain risk associated with any kind of change. And things might go terribly wrong. whenever we have any kind of interaction, whenever we introduce any kind of modification, but you can see the same type of attitude in the past. For example, you know, with any new kind of innovation, technological innovation, which has come about, there were people who thought, no, this is doomsday. That is the end of the world. You know, in the 19th century, when sort of the trains were created, then there were priests who were wondering, well, with the trains being created, they go at such a fast speed, the souls cannot keep up with their bodies, and the souls of the bodies do get separated. It didn't happen. And there are wonderful studies, also by the Haeckel members of the Haeckel House in Jena, and many others who stress clearly shown that whenever a new technology came up, there were people reacting and getting worried about doomsday scenarios. When we look at genetic modification, for example, on plants and animals, and that is really standardly already being produced, being realized. And in particular, basically in the United States, if you eat something, the chances of having something which was not genetically modified is extremely low. There's significant worries have been held in that respect. But we can see studies at least show that we don't have to have any health worries with respect to genetically modified plants and animals for consumption. For other reasons, then we need to see whether here the limits should be. When it comes to humans, there's been much of a reluctance, there has been much of a hindrance, much more of fear of actually using CRISPR-Cas genome editing on humans. There was a Chinese scholar scientist who was trained in the US and then returned to China, and he wanted to realize a genetic modification, or he realized a genetic modification on certain offspring where the father was HIV positive and the mother was not, because there was a certain risk of the child also being HIV positive. And he sort of realized that, and there was a massive outcry in the scientific community, because there are, in particular, if you try something out, there are significant risks associated with it. On the other hand, if you don't try things out, if you're not proactive, it is difficult to progress. And so if we see in the past, for example, smallpox vaccination. In the 19th century, there was one physician in the UK who had the idea of developing a smallpox vaccination. It was based on his studies, on his thinking about the specific issue, by drawing on the latest scientific insights. And then he basically, what he did was he consciously infected a farmer's boy with smallpox after giving him sort of the idea of the vaccination which he had in mind. So he consciously infected a farmer's boy. It could have killed him. The chances were actually not so small that it could have killed him. It was an extremely risky enterprise, but it worked. And as a consequence of him having developed the smallpox vaccination, we no longer have smallpox all over the world. So that's why sort of there's a struggle between the proactive and the precautionary principle. And whenever we do take such an important step, we implement new technologies, it is extremely risky, or at least a certain risk cannot be excluded. But without these risks, it wouldn't have been possible to make such significant steps and developments. And so I'm strongly in favor. And of course, one always needs to reduce the risk of extinction of life on Earth. The most significant ones of trying to reduce these elements to a minimum. However, in particular, in order to increase the personal health span, such research is extremely important, and a certain risk needs to be taken. So I'm pleading in favor of being a bit more proactive in that respect.
Thank you so much for the beautiful explanation, sir. Here I have my next question. So it is about, how do you see the tendencies of beyond humanism? So here we are talking about post-humanism, but when we talk about post-humanism, or beyond post-humanism. So we had a theory by Bruno Latour, the ANT theory, the actor network theory, where he talked about the stage where humans, machines, and animals, they'll be put on a single graph or on the pedestal. So how do you react to it?
So, I've previously alluded to that actually in a former reply when I sort of stressed what are the morally relevant capacities? Who should we take into consideration? Who should be granted respect when we engage with a certain entity? And traditionally, sort of the decisive factor was who is a person. And in the Western cultural tradition, personhood has usually been associated to someone who's got the divine spark, to someone who's got rationality, and a material soul is created in God's image. And that was at least humans. Humans were, it was this anthropocentric enterprise. It was an anthropocentric perspective, even though sometimes, you know, it was also, personhood also applied to the angels and God. But that is sort of the dualistic humanistic tradition to which sort of the variety of post-human enterprises is reacting against. So what should we have as an alternative? Where do we head for as an alternative? Which entities should we take into consideration? And then there was sort of speciesism which came about. So instead of focusing on membership to the human species, the anthropocentrism which has been dominant, we should look at actually who has got morally relevant for capacities for taking them into consideration. And morally relevant capacities, if we look at a fertilized egg, well, in the initial 3 weeks, it doesn't even have a brain. Brain development starts only 3 weeks after fertilization. It doesn't have a nervous system. Without nervous system and a brain, it can't suffer. Why should we attribute a higher moral status to a fertilized egg rather than to an adult chimpanzee? An adult chimpanzee can recognize him or herself in the mirror, can recognize the mark being placed on the forehead, stretches away the mark, passes the mark self-recognition test, which shows that it identifies itself with a separate self, which not only lives in the present, but also has an awareness of the past, lives in the present, and expects to live in the future. So it has a sense of a separate self which can suffer enormously. So, and suffering is something which is morally relevant. So as a consequence of the chimpanzee, the magpie, and dolphins who pass these tests, they having such a strong sense of the self and a sense of the suffering which goes along with it, you know, there's a good reason for taking them into moral consideration, for respecting them on a similar level, on the same level as humans, which again has other challenges. However, so there's a good reason for including certain non-human animals in sort of the highest category of who deserves to be respected. Do we already have algorithms who have similar capacities? And I mentioned before, no, we don't. I'm not excluding the possibility. I actually think there can be something like non-conscious suffering is possible. So even without an AI developing consciousness and self-consciousness, suffering might be possible as part of a cognitive process, simply being cognitively realizing of it being humiliated, because humiliation, for example, can be type of a cognitive suffering rather than essential a bodily suffering, and that might be sufficient for attributing a certain respect or even personhood to an algorithm. But current algorithms do not yet have the capacity. So we can see these movements and towards firstly taking non-human animals further into consideration. And we see that also in the cultural developments, in the sense that sort of veganism, vegetarianism is becoming more and more popular, is more and more widely being shared. And that is the consequence of that, of moving towards a more non-anthropocentric way of thinking. And eventually, I think there's a good chance of not only including, as I said, some non-human animals, and I don't mean all non-human animals, but only those who fulfill the appropriate criteria. Mosquitoes is a completely different thing. But in the same way, so I can see good chance of also algorithms, embodied algorithms, algorithms or computers, robots with sensors who have access to the outside world to also fulfill these criteria. So here, and the decisive question is how should we consider them? Should we also consider them in the same way, on an identical manner, all these persons, or should we take biodiversity into consideration? Does it matter more that diversity gets promoted rather than morally relevant capacities? And if these are two significant steps, and that is part of the ethical discourse between critical posthumanists and transhumanists. If we focus on morally relevant capacities, then a human, a chimpanzee, and a magpie deserve more moral consideration than a rat and a mosquito. If we look at biodiversity, and we had to make a choice between a magpie, a human, a rat, and a mosquito, and maybe there being two humans or two magpies, then we should sacrifice the human, and we only have the possibility of choosing, 3 out of 5. Then we would have to sacrifice humans or magpies or dolphins rather than the rat and the mosquito. And so I think no, there is sort of I think sort of the hierarchy has to be established, has to be considered, a hierarchy among those who have more morally relevant capacities and others who have less morally relevant capacities. And these morally relevant capacities are not anthropocentric. So it's not an anthropocentric way of thinking. However, it's a person-centric way of thinking. It does consider, of course, and this is important, it is not a new type of essentialism. This is just a suggestion on plausibility being here. Suffering is a morally relevant capacity. That's why it makes sense to attribute more moral consideration to a magpie rather than to a rat or a mosquito. So it is a non-essential, it's a non-anthropocentric way of thinking, but that doesn't mean it moves away from hierarchies, but it creates alternative hierarchies. And that's a point where critical posthumanists differ from my meta-humanist account. The critical posthumanists would rather promote diversity, or at least many of them. And there are some more radical posthumanists, and they take an even more radical stance. They would say, well, basically, we humans are the cancer of the earth. We are the ones why sort of biodiversity gets destroyed, gets reduced. We're bringing about the end of a lot of species dying, and by being the reason for that, what they argue for is a natalism to stop from reproducing, to stop having offspring, maybe to bring about the end of humanity. And I actually think this is, this goes too far, and this is we are humans, we have interests, and these interests need to be consideration. And as a human saying human interests shouldn't be consideration, that's a performative self-contradiction. So I don't even refer to them, I don't mention their names, because I think actually that is outside of the sensible academic scholarly discourse of the perspective which should be taken into consideration. It's more interesting to say that the organism, the organic structures, the holistic approach should be taken into consideration. However, here I'm in favor of a person-centered approach, which is still non-essentialist and non-anthropocentric, but there a certain type of hierarchy. A certain type of hierarchy can be justified, and I think it's important to justify the hierarchy, because the more intense capacity of suffering of magpies and dolphins in comparison to mosquitoes and rats is actually a very important insight.
Thank you for this wonderful explanation, sir. This will surely help us understanding the tendencies of beyond humanism. So with this, I have my another question. The question is about digital sexuality, right? So how do you see it? The use of artificial intelligence for one's organic pleasures. So how do you see it? And if we will talk about the nations like Japan, so we do see, and I have personally had a word with my friend. He lives in Japan, and he told me that they have this tendency of, or the thing called renting people out. So they rent maybe some boyfriends or girlfriends or relatives. So that's all they do. So how do you see these things?
So digital sexuality is a wide range of different topics which need to be covered. I mean, like in Japan and in China, there's an app or a program called Xiao Eyes, which is similar
Yes.
to Her, to the wonderful movie Her, where you basically talk with an algorithm and you have intimate exchanges, but it is simply an algorithm which responds. But you start an intimate connection, an intimate relationship, exchanges on anything. They're always there. You return back home. You're at home all by yourself. There's no one to talk to. You can turn on the app. You can have exchanges. Um, and that might be, it might be, it's comforting to talk to someone with that experience, which might work for some people, and which might, it might be an as good as it gets solution. It's still different from having then maybe someone organic, a carbon-based entity at home who fulfills one's desires. But as I said, in particular, the realm of sexuality is so diverse. There's such a great plurality of different needs and longings which people have. So I think sort of together with a move away from the binary understanding of traditional humanism, when we move away from the traditional binary understanding and together with heteronormativity, we move towards, metasexuality. We move towards a non-binary understanding of sexuality, which means no, there's a great openness to different fields of sexuality, and people have different needs and resonances. Maybe some might only be fulfilled by means of sex robots or by means of sexual softwares and apps. What gets interesting when it gets interesting is sort of in general a certain behavior. So traditionally in natural law, in Christian and Catholic natural law theory, going back to Aristotle and going back to Thomas Aquinas, there was a common connection between reproduction and sexuality. Basically, the idea was, well, in this Aristotelian teleological understanding, the eyes are there for seeing, the nose is there for smelling, and the genitals are there for reproduction. And the only natural way to use one's genitals is to reproduce. If you don't have the chance to reproduce, then it becomes unnatural. As a consequence, masturbation is morally wrong. As a consequence, using contraceptives, the pills, and is morally wrong. In vitro fertilization, any kind of move away from natural reproduction is morally false. What we've seen, on the other hand, in the past couple of 100 years, sort of, there's a separation now from reproduction and sexuality. We sort of professionalize we professionalize reproduction and also technicize sexuality. So professionalizing reproduction means, well, we make a decision whether we want to use the pill, the condom, whether we want to use in vitro fertilization plus pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. What is being developed is also artificial wombs are in the process. The biobag, where the lamb has been born, is being developed. They're working on biobags, on artificial wombs for humans. So here we see
As you're talking about the artificial wombs, I would want to. I hope you also know it, that I was reading this article where I just read that it's in coming 10 to 20 years we will be having a stage, or we'll be having a time where it's possible for us to become parents, and the child will be one, but still there can be two fathers or two mothers and one father. So these scenarios are also on the way. So you are
Exactly.
absolutely right. But
Maybe if
again,
I
my
just sort of finish the thought,
yes,
it is not just, and it's not just this. Actually, two mothers and one father is already, as biological parents, is already possible. That is a technology which is already legal, for example, in the UK. It's possible to have children with three biological parents. They're currently working also on parenthood for same-sex parenthood for men, sort of to have three men who can have or two men who have a kind of biologically related
yes,
child. And they've already realized that in mice, and they think sort of in 5 to 10 years, that might also be possible for humans. So as a consequence, so just to finish off the thought concerning
yes, yes,
so
please.
sexuality and reproduction. So we used to have the unity between sexuality and reproduction. Now sexuality and reproduction gets separated, and reproduction can be realized by technological means, and sexuality can include, there's a great diversity of different ways of how sexuality can unfold itself. Technologies talking to algorithms or having sex robots as partners is one or two possible options. But the good thing is that we're moving away from that, from the fixation on a binary understanding, and I'm not, whatever works for the humans, whatever works for persons, and that is fine, as long as no third person, as long as no other person directly gets harmed. That's when something becomes problematic.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I totally agree with this thing that you have said right now. And I just feel that as far as the people are comfortable and anything, any baby transhumanism or anything is not getting on any other ones now, we should continue with all the traditions, but not at the stake of humanity. That's what I feel. And again, my last question is a little personal, sir, but still, I would want you to give me your insights. As I am a musician, I am a guitarist, I'm a singer. So I just see this thing, and I really want to know this thing, that how music is connected to, as you are a philosopher of music as well, as far as I'm not wrong. So how do you see music being connected with the post-humanism and philosophy?
No, wonderful. That's a topic which is really close to my heart. So I've been, been a
Same here.
musician as well, and sort of still continue doing close exchanges with artists, with musicians, composers in particular, and that is a topic which is extremely important to me. I'm currently actually teaching a course for the first time here at John Cabot University in Rome, which is entitled Opera and Philosophy. And so I'm showing the sort of the history of opera and the philosophical meaning, the invention of opera, which took place in Florence, and then the further development via Gluck and Mozart and Wagner, Puccini, and current times, Philip Glass, Michael Nyman, and Sven Helbig, also Sven Helbig, the German composer, who's also composed, realized a wonderful music drama entitled Vom Lärm der Welt, from the noise of the world, where he basically draws upon the reflections we're currently facing with, sort of from gene engineering, from nuclear catastrophes, and the question is, should a woman give birth? So that's part of the music drama. Should a woman give birth into a world with so many challenges? And she does in the end. But he draws upon, in the music drama, it's being drawn upon various religious, philosophical reflections, being tensions, and the reflections are being interwoven with the actual, with the plot. So it's different scenes where theoretical and practical sides get demonstrated, in particular with respect to technological, cultural changes of our times. And so with him, and we've been friends for, for a long time, nearly 10 years. And as a consequence, so yeah, we're exactly reflecting. We have a written exchange on that topic. We're writing sort of how can a music within these cultural circumstances, what should be the goal? What should be the end? How should technologies being considered? For example, one of the questions with which one might struggle is, what about skills? And you can talk about the skill of handwriting. And the skill of handwriting has been a long established field. It goes along, you know, it's connected with our traditionally, sort of language has been seen as what makes us humans special. So the skill of handwriting is also something, expression of that linguistic capacity. Now everyone's moving towards typing. Hardly anyone's practicing handwriting anymore. Is that a loss if a traditional skill gets lost? Another friend of mine, Dale Herrickstead, who's realized, for example, who won several Emmys, and who was responsible for the media design of the movie Minority Report. I know he's practiced calligraphy in order to develop capacities, which he then uses in order to use them for more futuristic, his futuristic visions and transhumanist media visions. So, there is an importance in being aware of what is being taken place in the past. But things are changing, and if something's working in a better and a more efficient way, can realize more, is a better way to respond to the goals we're currently facing with, then I think it's good to draw upon the latest technologies, to draw upon the latest means, algorithms, in order to create new sounds, to create new music, maybe in order to get inspiration for new musical enterprises. Richard Wagner has done the same thing. He was lacking certain sounds for his orchestra, for the music dramas he was composing, and as a consequence, he invented new instruments in order to realize the sounds. Now we've got different means for realizing sounds. Now we've got different means for realizing, for bringing about new musical pieces. We've got the algorithmic means. So in the same way, actually, as in the past, people have drawn upon the latest developments, that is also possible for us now. And if a traditional skill no longer fulfills the practical need, then, you know, it is not it's not necessarily a really serious loss if one focuses on different elements. On the other hand, in order to grasp the possibilities of what can be done, this is always, the future needs the past. We need to study what has gone on, what has taken us to where we are at the moment. We need that historical awareness in order not to repeat history, not to repeat something. You know, many of the things that people and music artists would think, without a sense of history, it's easily that one simply repeats something. One thinks one is very innovative, but one has forgotten that the same thing has already been thought and done 500 years ago. So the future needs a past, and in order to bring about a new development, a solid engagement with the past is a very important enterprise, but it always has to, in the end, to respond to the art historical questions, challenges of our times, to the challenges we ourselves as communicators, as what we want to express, as what the artist wants to realize and express, and what responds to the significant challenges of our times. Whatever fulfills its needs should be drawn upon and should be used in order to realize it. And I don't have a final answer sort of what that is, and that depends on each specific artist, what these needs are. But that also means maybe certain skills do not have to be considered if they don't correspond, if they don't resonate with the artist who's currently realizing it. And maybe one can draw upon an algorithmically realized symphony, and as a consequence works over it, alters it, so as an initial inspiration, and then use it develops it further, and then something extremely new and fascinating can come about. So, and basically these are the exchanges I'm having with a lot of living artists, like Eduardo Kach, who created the Alba, the fluorescent rabbit, Stellak with an ear in his lower arms, who's one of the great performance artists, and Sven Helbig, now to name just 3 artists whose works I find particularly stimulating.
This question was again very crucial for me. As being a musician, you have so many, you go through with so many dilemmas. So now you have cleared things. And again, I guess we can add a new word to the post-human glossary. It will be post-musicology. And yes, so Professor Songner, I would want to give you a very small information about my projects. So as I was telling you that soon I am going to start a new project. So it is The name of the project is Indian Post-Human Society. So soon, within 2 to 3 months, I may be launching that society. So it will be again about the traditions of post-humanism, about the global and Indian scenario. So I'll be really honored if you would be a part of it. And yes, with the complete things, I will be sending you the brochures and all the informations. But yes, a name or a person like you, if it will be added to my society, it will be an honor for me.
No, it's my honor. Many thanks for that kind invitation, which I accept. So I'm looking forward to being an active member in that society, a contributing member in the society. And I think it is extremely important sort of to take that local approach. There are certain resonances, things which might be important on a global scale, not saying universalistic, but widely shared, like expanding personal health span is something which is meaningful for a lot of persons. There are other issues which are more culturally located, which are more embedded in a specific setting, maybe just in Rome, maybe just in a specific city, maybe just in a specific culture. And so actually yesterday I gave a talk at a conference on Africa, dedicated to Africa and transhumanism. And again, here there were many people referring to Ubuntu, referring to Afrofuturism, and there are resonances between transhumanism, between also Euro-transhumanism and Afrofuturism. And then one can see whether there's some creative interferences, whether some destructive interferences, whether something's more culturally located, whether something is has a more wider appeal, and one can see how to creatively interfere and start resonances which create something new. I was very happy, for example, to see that in just about a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine from Chile informed me that a thesis was written on my version of metahumanism by a scholar in Chile, whom I didn't know, with whom I've never had any contact or exchanges before. And I was very happy to see that in the very different cultural setting, sort of these reflections were sufficiently resonating in order to take them up, develop them further, and to take the local considerations in further considerations, and so that a new stimulus gets created, because that's sort of the local approaches. It is extremely important in order to avoid neocolonial implications and challenges. So there are certain more wider appeals, but also always the specialized cultural identity, the specialized cultural nuances need to be taken into consideration. That's why I'm very happy that you're starting that Indian Post-Human Society.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I will always be looking forward for your contribution in my society. And there are so many ventures I'll be talking about. So thank you so much for this interview. And it was an honor. It was pleasure being in this interview with you. And I just really think that whatever projects we'll be dealing with, you will be an active part of it. So thank you so much for being with us.
Many
Any
thanks for your kind words.
any suggestion from your side? Any questions from your side? Anything you would want to ask?
No, I'm looking forward to hearing about your enterprises and to seeing, hopefully, also in how far sort of to start something like post-human studies courses at university. If you know of them in various Indian university where that takes place, if you maybe encourage people to do so, to take on such a challenge, maybe you also want to realize something yourself at your university. That might be extremely interesting for me to hear to receive such information. Otherwise, Jana, I wish you all the best, health, happiness, and loads of joy, and looking forward to further exchanges with you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sogna. It was wonderful being with you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
take your leave. Thank you. Thank you so much. Namaste.